Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate your attention and your willingness to come hear us talk. My name's Ernestine Hays. My Tlingit name is Sangaslukt. I'm Kagwantan Wolfhouse, Shitkakwan. I want to focus all of our attention today on the person that we all think of when we hear the phrase Tlingit literature. Nora Marks was the first of 16 children born to Emma and Willie Marks. Nora has written about her early life on a fishing boat and in subsistence camps on Douglas Island and growing up in Juneau. Her early experiences growing up in this area are familiar to everyone who grew up in Southeast Alaska, but her later talent for communicating those experiences is remarkable. Nora's first language was Tlingit, as it was for her parents and brothers and sisters. Nora didn't begin to speak English until she was 8 years old. Nora's dad was a master carver and an accomplished fisherman. Her mother was a highly praised and renowned bead worker. The members of her family, her sisters, her brothers, and her extended family include master beadwork artists, master wood carvers, and teachers. Nora was an anthropology student in the mid-1970s at the Alaska Methodist University in Anchorage, where she began literary work when she was an anthropology student. Nora has agreed to begin our session by telling her story up until that time. She is an accomplished and acclaimed poet, playwright, scholar, tradition bearer, translator, consultant, and teacher, whose works have been widely anthologized and whose generosity of spirit is recognized, treasured, and appreciated by everyone who knows her. Please help me welcome Nora Marks Dauenhauer.
Thank you, Sangaslukt Gunalchish. In real life, Sangaslukt belongs to the clan that are my grandparent clan, the Kagwantan. Kagwantan was my father's grandparent clan, and the Takdaintan is also my grandparent clan. And also Tluknakhadi, who are from Dry Bay. I'll just start off now and talk about my life before 1970. During my lifetime, since I was 18, I was a cannery worker. I worked in salmon, you name it, from one end of the cannery to the other end. I worked at patch table, retort, and sliming and filler machine. And then the last one that really got me was the egg pulling. I wrote a poem about that one. I quit after that. I gave up on doing that kind of work. But to keep on working, I earned enough money to get enough money to buy groceries, because I had 4 children. And then after I buy groceries, We went out and had a few drinks, which led to a whole bunch of them, and lost the weekend doing this. I'll bet some of you remember that time. The bars were fun. They had live music, and we were into jitterbugging, big band music. It was great to be alive. But the sad part of it is I gave all my hard-earned money, the ones that was left from my groceries and incidents that I needed to buy to keep my family going. I gave it to the bars. Nothing was left. And after I went and earned this kind of a life, I was hired to teach at the high school because I could speak Tlingit. I guess they thought I could speak, because if I could speak, I could go and teach. That's not a true thing. You can't do that. Can't go into classroom without training. I found that out after teaching for about 2 months, 1 month. But I did find books that were done by linguists at Angoon. The linguists spent 15 years at Angoon and collected enough material to make a noun dictionary and prayers from churches and other small books that were readers for Tlingit. And when I started to read the noun dictionary, and I found it not too hard. I spent a lot of time on one word. And then I came upon this word "at," which means pot. I couldn't believe that "at" can be written. I was in heaven. I was flying. I'm still flying. I could read "at." "At" is spelled K _ WATL apostrophe with a tone going up. "At." Anyway, that's what I found to be helpful at the time when I was teaching. I had 14 students, and they were a mixture of Caucasian and Tlingits. And I still know them. I say hello to them, ask them how they're doing, and they are very wonderful adults and have families. But at the time, it was really hard to try and teach with just a few things at my hand to show them what Tlingit means. This means in Tlingit. And anyway, the kids that were Tlingit couldn't speak Tlingit either. They all spoke English, so that made it twice as hard to teach them. And halfway through the school, midway through the school year, the assistant superintendent brought a piece of paper to me and said on the paper, we would like to keep Nora, but she has no training. She has no degree, and she's a 6th grade dropout. I didn't know that you couldn't teach if you were a dropout. And I don't know who told them. I do know, kind of know now. But anyway, it's all right. That's okay. It's in the past. I'm here now. So I went ahead and cried my eyes out in a car. And then I went to the A&B and showed them the letter. They Xeroxed it and everybody had a copy. I still have a copy of that letter. And by that time, I was going to GED. There's this general education program in Juneau. And I was going up to the high school, grade school by the high school way up there. And a few guys with me were, I remember them, and I still talk to them. And it took me 7 months to complete my GED after I dropped out at 6th grade. And I thought everything was going to be okay after I got my GED. No way, I was left without a job. And by that time, a professor from AMU wrote a letter to me, and he liked my work. And I didn't know who he was. Anyway, by that time we were dancing. Tlingit style, we formed a dance group, my family and a couple other women who weren't part of the family. And we did Tlingit dancing. And our group was called Mark's Trail Dancers. There was about 12 of us. And we went to Fairbanks. We were invited to Fairbanks University Native Emphasis Week, and then we went to the National Congress of American Indians when they had their meeting at Anchorage, and we had a lot of fun, but we could barely walk when we got done dancing. We walked from 4th Avenue to Fireweed Lane. Ooh, it was hard. Anyway, that's the type of life I was leading before 1970. And then at that conference, the Native Emphasis Week, a friend of mine's husband took me up to AMU, and he's told me that somebody wants to meet me there. So no harm in that. And I went up, and lo and behold, I met Richard Dauenhauer. He wanted me to tell him Raven stories. I still haven't told him any Raven stories. But our next book is on Raven stories. And I still have 5 minutes, huh? Oh. Anyway. Everybody went back home, and I entered the college because they had open door policy. So I entered the college that way. And I graduated after 5 years because we were hired by Dr. Krause. Dr. Krause came to see me and put me through the recitation of doing the X's in our language. He drilled me, and well, people were wondering what was happening in the bedroom he took me to. My friend later on asked, "What were you guys doing?" "Oh, what?" Anyway, Dr. Krause, you all know, is a linguist of Athabaskan, I think. Anyway, he was great. He hired me and Dick to go to the southeast to see if we could gather Tlingit folklore. These are stories and whatever my people could tell me. And it was tough because no one has ever done this before. And I felt like a robber coming in there. But some people were just really generous and helped me along. And then they sent me to other people that they knew good stories. In that way, we gathered quite a bit of the stories. And now we're digitizing our stories onto discs. These DC? They're those discs from CD, that's what it is. Well, anyway, I'll get off for a while.
Gonna change. So Nora's talked about the beginning of her career, and I work at UAS, University of Alaska Southeastern Juneau, where many of the students there are just beginning their careers, and some are just beginning their education. I was born here in Juneau, and I went away for 25 years. When I was 15, my mother and I moved to California, and I finally came back 25 years later. I did that when I turned 40. Although not a day had gone by that I didn't want to come back home, when I turned 40, I realized it was time to do that. Then I was living in Juneau, and I'd always said, well, maybe one of these days I'll go to college. I had never finished high school. I dropped out in the 10th grade. And so when I turned 50, I went to the university and began my college career. So now I'm a professor there, and this next speaker that I'm going to introduce is one of my hardest working, most determined, most good-natured students at the beginning of his career and his education. Help me welcome William Kushnick.
I just want to let you guys know I haven't publicly spoke in a number of years, and I am very nervous. My hands are vibrating. But like she said, I'm just now beginning my education. I am a high school dropout. I did receive my diploma downtown here in Juneau. And then when I got home, me and my father had a chat, and he decided for me that I should do something with my life. And so I'm here now. I got asked to write about the most important lessons in my life, and I decided to use my father as an inspiration to write this little story that I'm about to share with you guys. It's sorry, nervous again. But I would just like to share with you about this, because every time I read this, I get an overwhelming feeling of I go get my certificate through the UAS. And the title is The Most Important Lesson in My Life by my father, William Kushnick. My father taught me how to survive in life. My father taught me things like fishing, dealing with my problems as a teenager, and keeping an open mind. My father was there when I was dealing with certain issues that arose. He showed me ways of catching various types of fish and steering maneuver in fishing vessels or skiffs. and what to look out for when I was traveling, or where to go to get certain type of native foods. Things that we talked about when I was a teenager, and most important, relationships on how I'm supposed to treat women. He taught me how to keep an open mind. One phrase that stuck out most, he said, is "You're no good to nobody, not even yourself, is when you're angry." That is one of the most important lessons I have learned from my father. I have learned a lot from that man. When I was young, there were boating trips that me and my father took. I didn't know what he was teaching me at the time. They always took place in Southeast Alaska on the ocean side of Prince of Wales Island. They were mostly fishing trips on a trolling boat. He never really liked fishing for other types of fish. He just found a sense of peace when he was trolling. My father and mother and I would go out every summer all the way till the end of summer. He would show and tell me things like, when I was at the wheel, for instance, you have to go a certain depth in order to catch certain size fish, but be careful you don't get snagged up on bottom because you'll ruin the trolling poles. And always pay attention to the fathom meter. Passing some islands, he would point out, that is the Sockeye Creek, or this is another halibut spot. And those rocks over there have a lot of gumboots and seaweed on them. It was a really big learning lesson that I didn't realize at the time, but because of him, I knew where the big deer were located, because he and my mother pointed out some spots. Because of them, I can pull up shrimp now so big you have to club them. He told me that if I was going to debone, at the end of each day, he showed me how to ice the fish so they wouldn't go bad. He told me that if I were to debone a king salmon, that I would need pliers to remove them. My favorite time with him was when he taught me how to smoke the fish. During the fish smoking process, it was then I really got to know my father more. He was a very passionate man and loved providing for his family, and he loved his wife very much. The things I learned from my father in my teenage years was very different for me. I was dealing with a lot of new emotions and I have never felt or discovered yet. I got into a fight one year and got suspended by the school. It was then I heard the phrase, "You're no good to nobody, not even yourself, when you're angry." That phrase did not sink into my head until my adult years. If I had learned what he said in my teen years, I probably would have not been suspended or been in trouble as much. I was in trouble a lot in high school for fighting with other students. I received a lot of suspension time. I could have used that time for a better purpose. During these events happening in my life, I had a closed mind on how to handle my problems. Whenever my father and I had a chance, I would ask him about my problems and how to solve them. I was dealing with a lot of anger issues in those years. I had gotten into another fight at school. I asked him, what should I do, because the other kid had brothers. I really wanted to see my brothers fight. His response was, "Don't be so closed-minded. One action can open a lot more. Be careful on what or how you choose the answer to the problem. It might cause more issues for you." After he said that, I began to think about what he was saying about my anger issues. When I was getting older, I was having some concerns about marriage. I was 19 years of age. I began to look at my mother and father. I wanted to see how I was supposed to act. He taught me a man is supposed to treat a woman and see what, He taught me how a man is supposed to treat a woman and see what a marriage was supposed to be like and what a marriage is. It was then I saw how a man is supposed to love and respect his wife. He showed me that when she walks to a door, she shouldn't have to open it herself. When she is angry, or when she was hungry, I should go to the kitchen and make something. He basically taught me the overall that I should be considerate, loving, and kind to her. Whenever an issue came up that was important and Mom started arguing with him, he would always stay in control of himself. He never really got upset with her. I learned all of this through the years of observation. If someone special in your life, you honor that person and respect and protect her from harm and danger. While my father was showing me all of this, he gave me a teaching lesson to be considerate of my wife's feelings. The way my father was to me, how he spoke to me and my mother, and how he treated me, I can treat my kids the same way and my ever-loving wife. By doing the things he taught me and what he missed, I will be teaching my sons or daughters. Because of him, I know how to survive in the wilderness by fishing and knowing where to hunt. He really showed me how to be a good husband and how to be a great dad. For that, I am greatly honored that he was my father. I learned a great deal from that man. I'll never forget him for what he has showed me. William G. Kushnick.
We've heard Nora and William talk about the beginning of a career, the beginning of an education, and it's a journey that we're on, telling a story about our own journeys. And this next speaker we have is brought us from the beginning, and now we're at about midpoint. Bertram Adams has written 2 books, This is Yakutat and When Raven Cries. He's also written articles and essays that have been published in publications like the Juneau Empire and on his website. One would probably say that Mr. Adams is about in the midpoint of his career, with many accomplishments still in front of him. And here he is with the presentation on theme in Tlingit literature. Mr. Adams.
It's good to see you. Gonna chish. Kadashan. Ka natski tsu yuqdu SOK. Yech na katsati. Kuk na khari ayakhat. Gonna kwan. Ka each hit da khayakhat. Shika kagon tan yadi. Swedish ka shanga kwedi dachkhan. I'm happy to be here, and hope that what I have to share with you today will will help aspiring young writers such as Bill over here continue on with a desire to become a writer. It took me 20, 30 years to reach where I have now. And most of it, was a lack of understanding for using the tools. I'm not going to share that with you now, although I think it'd be a real good subject, or how I even got into writing. It was a desire that I had ever since I was a youngster, but my mother was a poet, and oh, by the way, I have an aunt sitting in this chair right here, Mrs. Brady, my honest-to-goodness, true blood aunt, and I'm happy to see her. She's also written a book, and about her life, her life, called Through the Storm, Toward the Sun. Is that it? Okay. I have a brother that has also written a book, and I was kind of hoping he'd be here to listen to me, but evidently he's out peddling his book over at the gold medal tournament. What I'd like to do is, I don't think I have this very well organized here, but go ahead and, there we go. When Raven Cries is a story about a young man who was educated in the Christian boarding school. And he was raised traditionally by his fathers and uncles and the people in the community as a young boy. But when he was sent to the boarding schools, his whole life had changed, because by the time that he had finished high school, he was convinced that the Indian ways were no longer applicable to the future of the native people. So he went back home to his community and spent about 8 years trying to figure out how he was going to try to change his the people in his community's minds about history and culture and language, because he didn't think that those things were needed anymore, and that the new way of life was going to be the future of his people. And so his purpose was to go out and try to convince his community that their ways needed to be changed. In the prologue of the book, there's a story of Raven, and it talks a little bit about Raven and how he came into being and all of his creations and so forth. But at the end of the prologue, it says in there that Raven, after he had done all of his creations and so forth, was deified, and that he lived in a cave over in Katila, or was back on the Nass River, where some people thought he came from. However, when he sees some of his people going astray, he comes out and he tries to change that person's way back to their traditional ways. And when he does that, he normally lets out a cry. And in this situation, he cried like the character Samuel's mother. And throughout the novel, Raven keeps reminding Samuel of who he is as he strives to go through the process of changing his community and his people's lives. And so that's what that story is about. And then this is Yakutat. It's a collection of short stories about the lifestyle, modern day lifestyle of the people of Yakutat. It talks about fishing, hunting, and history, culture, and so forth. And what I've done with these stories is taken a little bit of an event or a time in history, and then I've created a plot and developed characters and dialogues. And the purpose is to try to entertain as well inform about our history and culture. Next. When Raven Cries, talks about family values. Samuel, who is the main character, as I said, was raised in his traditional ways. The seeds of his culture and history and his traditions and language and dance was planted in him early. And then, as I mentioned earlier, he was sent away to the boarding school. But one of the things that he did admire was his father. He admired his father because his father stuck up for Indian ways. At an Alaska Native Brotherhood meeting one time, he accompanied his father, and he sat and listened to his father as his father talked about subsistence and history and tradition and trying to hang on to the things that were they're keeping the native close to the land. And so after the meeting was over, they were walking home, and Samuel was maybe 8 or 9 years old then, and he says, "Is Raven happy tonight, Father? Is he happy because you stuck up for the Indian ways?" "I'm not sure, my son, if I stuck up for the Indian ways in a way that would make Raven happy. I can say, though, that I did my best." "I wish I were Raven," Samuel said as he haughtily sauntered beside his father. "I would clap my wings real loud for you." So, we talk about the family relationship and how close they were in those days, and we need to bring that back together again. So he admired his father for sticking up for Indian ways. You can go ahead and save it. And the thing that the novel, even though it's short, you can read it in a few hours, talks about assimilation and acculturation, the boarding schools. And then one of the things that Samuel Meyer admired was his physical education teacher, because he was good at playing basketball. His PE teacher took special interest in him and helped him to develop his talents as an athlete. And then there was the Christianity thing, okay? many of the people of those times were converted to the notion of Christianity, and they brought that back into their communities. Go ahead. Another one is, another part of the plot is caring. This story was taken from a long short story, actually. And I decided to turn it into a short novel instead, because there was so much I wanted to get impacted into the plot of the novel that I felt a novelette would be more appropriate. His children were taught to care for one another, and that they must watch over one another. As the plot goes through the novel, one of his sons, little boy, gets lost, and it involves the whole community in trying to find that little boy. And they really think that he might have walked over the dock and drowned, or something terrible had happened to him. And I'm not going to share what happened to you, because you need to read it in order to get the humor out of it. But anyhow, another thing was alcoholism. Go ahead. Samuel's father was an alcoholic. But even though he was an alcoholic, he stuck up for his traditional Indian ways. And so he did learn a lot from him in that regard. He had a younger brother who was getting involved in alcohol. And he was going in the same direction which his father was, which the purpose for that was to foreshadow, what was before us as Native people with this issue of alcohol. And then identity. One of the things that Samuel really struggled with after he came back from the boarding school was, who am I? Where do I fit into the scheme of things? And one of the things that he dealt with was, the symbol of the apple. For Native Americans, many became what is called apples, red on the outside but white on the inside. And so he had to struggle, real closely with that. One of the things that he was talking about toward the end of one of the chapters here, as he was thinking, was he an apple, as many had accused of his kind? Was he red on the outside and white on the inside? Next one, please. The theme of When Raven Cries is that you can't change who you are for the sake of wanting to be someone else. You can't change who you are for the sake of wanting to become something else. And then the premise is that Raven keeps reminding us of who we are, who we really are. And as I mentioned, those values there. Okay, that's it on When Raven Cries. You can move it over to the next one, please. This is Yakutat, Yakutat Aya. It's a collection of short stories that tell about the lifestyle of the people in Yakutat. It talks about people fishing. It talks about rivers. It talks about mountains. It talks about history. It talks a little bit about culture. One of the very first stories in it is called The Storekeeper. And in The Storekeeper, it's about a young man who, after the Second World War, came home from the Navy. He had served 4 years in the Navy, and he enlisted when he was very young, and so he was still very young when he came back home, maybe 21, 22 years old. And things had changed. He too had been raised in the traditional ways, and he noticed that in the 4 years he was gone, that the community had changed. They were swifting more to doing away with the culture and the history and so forth. One of them is marriage. You always had to marry the opposite. And in this story, it depicts how he was ready for marriage, but he couldn't find anyone in the community, or his parents or grandparents weren't identifying anyone in the community where he could start courting and eventually marry. And so the story, then goes on and talks, about those problems and so forth. But at the end, it turns out okay. And I think the theme of that story is, if you're diligent, faithful, and in what you are doing, that things will turn out for you okay. Please, maybe the next one. One of the things that I've tried to do is use some, as I said earlier, actual events or history or a piece of culture and take those facts and fictionalize them. And Frederica de Laguna, who read this collection of short stories, says your scheme for writing about facts in the form of fiction is a good one. And I thought that was really inspiring and great coming from a person like her, who is a very famous anthropologist and author. And so I like to battle that one around. Diane Banson wrote the foreword in When Raven Cries, and as she was talking about Tlingit story, she says here, a Tlingit story is rarely shared without a moral or a straightforward point. This is true in this book, and although it may seem outside the boundaries of defined fascinating fiction, this story is true in the makeup of Tlingit oratory. Here in Kadashan's writing, there is a history, a reality of experience, and discovery that is typical in Tlingit storytelling. The elements of fiction are present, but so are the elements of traditional imagery, as in the Raven's presence, which unites traditional and modern ways, bringing insights to the main character's struggles. And she dubbed this type of writing, of combining history or facts and fiction, as bicultural fiction. And I thought that was interesting. Next one, please. In the story, in the short story collection, these are my own watercolor paintings, and I illustrate some of the stories, with my watercolors. This one, as I said, is about the storekeeper, the young man who served as a clerk in a store, and he spends all day there, and he sees girls coming in and out, and people, buying and stuff, and he sees this one beautiful girl walk in the door, and he wonders if that's going to be the right one for him. But anyhow, D. Lowenbaugh, who used to write for the June Empire, says Western society has thrown hard choices at Alaska Native children and their parents, and the author makes us realize just what they have given up for us. Next, please. The Smile Maker is a day about three young boys who are punished. They are told to sit on a log along the banks of the Angoon River on a very nice day when fishing started to increase in the rivers, and there they watch all of the activity as they sit and wait for their father to come home and give them a spanking for being naughty. Next one, please. Something to Give is the story about two couple who fish on the Elsac River down in Gunahu. That's where Nora and I, we have our ancestral roots come from that area. And they are newly married. They love each other deeply, but they don't know how to express it. And one of the things is that he is able to do is relate a lot more better with eagles than he does with his wife. And the story, I think, is quite fascinating. Next one, please. Pinch Me is a young man fishing on the Situk River. His imagination runs away from him because he has a girlfriend that he is not sure whether, she is really interested in him, or it appears to him that he is no longer interested in her culture as well. And things turn out okay in that one too. Next one, please. This one here I'd like to spend a little bit more time on. Do I have time for about 5 more minutes or so? Okay. The World Forgetting by the World Forgot is my favorite story. It's a 3-part story. And it talks about a young man whose father has died. And he was very young, 16 or 17 years old. And he's been given the responsibility of carrying on the fishing venture on the Aquay River. And so he has a brother and a mother to take care of. And they had both, him and his brother had been going to boarding school themselves, Mount Edgecombe to be exact. And his brother had to go, in September and to start school, and so he stayed behind to finish the fishing season. And so The World Forgetting by the World Forgot is a story about his experiences of one day, how he became, confused and and afraid into becoming a fisherman as well as a man. But here he is. It's the day's end of the fishing, and he is sitting along the bank of the Aquay River. You can see Kadashan or Mount Fairweather in the background there, and he's looking out onto the ocean. And out on the ocean, he sees an object that is bobbing around on the waters, and he wonders what it was. And so I want, to have us focus on that, because there's a lot of symbolism in this story that I think is worth paying attention to. One morning, he wakes up and he hears his mother out in the kitchen banging pots and pans. She was preparing breakfast, and she was humming a song while she worked, and he could hear Ace. There's another symbol in the story. Ace is a little puppy, his 2-month-old puppy, parading around the room and constantly getting under Estelle's feet. That's his mother. Arnie's heard a yelp and then the sound of tiny claws scratching on the wooden floor as Ace retreated for cover under the Davenport. "Well, it serves you right," Estelle proclaimed. Arnie chuckled. He imagined his puppy's face peeking from under the hiding place he always used when he knew he was in trouble, his dark brown eyes darting this way and that way, his small black nose sniffing. And then there's bacon sizzling on the stove, and so forth and so forth. Then later on, as he decides to get up, he makes some sound at which his little puppy, recognizes he's awake. At the sound of his master's voice, Ace left his retreat, scampered into the entrance of the bedroom, and parted the curtain with his muggy black nose, sniffing for Arnie's familiar scent. Arnie watched him sit on his haunches and cock his brown head from one side to the other. Arnie slipped his sweatshirt over his head and pulled it around himself. He's getting himself dressed. And then the doggy starts tugging away at the sock as he's putting it on his feet. And he says, "Get," Arnie whooped, trying to shake off his mischievous chestnut pup from his foot. "Get, doggone it, get." Then he gave a hard kick, and Ace scrambled on his back and rolled over on his feet with a piece of yarn dangling out of the corner of his mouth. And so I wanted to depict in here the importance of the dog, the little puppy in the story. So his parents, his mother and his brother, take off on an airplane because his brother has to catch the commercial airplane from Yakutat down to Sitka, where he is going to enter into school. In the second part of the story, there's a little bit of reference to his culture. It was there, somewhere in that ancient Tlingit village that had been buried by decades of growth. Arnie and Richard had never been successful in locating the site, and no one, for that matter, had been. The next slide, please. And the village of Rosayat, is right in between the back of those trees there and the mountains, and the sand dunes there. That's Raven's footprints when he pulled in the real big ark from the ocean, let out of the animals and the birds and the fishes, and nothing grows there. There's sand there and then trees on both sides. But anyhow, the village is called Kvasnikoff, and there are 7 tribal houses there, and their grandmother challenged Arnie and his brother to look for that village. There's another symbolism there, looking for his roots, looking for who he really is. There's a discussion between him and his father, who had passed away a year before, wanted his sons to be dedicated to the art of fishing, but Arnie had no desire to do anything like that. He says, "I never was a fisherman, and to really tell you the truth, I don't think I ever will be. You can't make something out of a person if he doesn't want to be that. I really want to be what you want me to be, a man, but I think there are other ways to do it." This is a flashback on the conversation between himself and his father. And then at the end of that part, he convinces himself here. He says before he gave up being a fisherman, he had to be one first. He is going to take his father's advice. Determination swelled within him like a balloon, and enthusiasm sparkled his whole being. Arnie Jones was going to be a fisherman, and I'm going to be a fisherman on my own steam, he told himself, as the words of his father echoed in his brain and vibrated in his soul, because that's what men are made of. And so Arnie and his mother and his brother take off. In the third part of the story, he's actually going out and fishing. Next slide, please. And there he is, out on the mouth of the Aqua River. The fish started coming in real fast, and he spent all day just pulling in the salmon and delivering it. And then he comes back home. And if you could go ahead and move it again. Oh, that's okay. He sat there on the sand in the stillness of the night and fought off mosquitoes that flocked around him like a swarm of bees on a honeycomb. Time had passed swiftly. Stars twinkled down at him through a hole in the clouds. There was no moon, but even if there would be of no real value, he could tell by the dark shadows that clouds had formed at the base of Mount Fairweather. Surely now the weather was going to change. The thought gave Arnie a sudden intense feeling of isolation in the world. Arnie wondered how the man in the skiff was holding out. That little thing that he saw bobbing out at the beginning of the story on the ocean was a man in a skiff, and he was making his way down toward Dry Bay. He was certain he would not enter into Dry Bay on time. He, whoever it was, would have to survive the entire night in the cold, in the darkness, drifting impossible, unaware of his bearings, uncertain, apprehensive, and of course lonely. Yes, you darn tootin', he said. Whoever it is would be lonely. Loneliness is so common when one is alone. The world may be forgetting me, but I can't forget the world. And so he resolves at this point that he is going to work toward finding himself, and he becomes incensed with the idea that this man out there on the ocean all by himself was experiencing uncertainty, maybe even death, and the fact that he is lonely. And why should I feel sorry for myself when other people are in worse conditions than I am? And so he starts walking up the bank, and he stops, and he gives a salute to the guy out there. That he says, "Good luck, friend," he said, "whoever you are." Then he turned and walked briskly up the narrow trail to the cabin, speculating the countless tomorrows he's going to encounter before he could really consider himself what his father wanted him to be. His father, you remember, wanted him to be a man. What he said about himself that morning was still true, but when he had said it, he did not truly understand the actual merit of the declaration. He did have a lot of living to do, and he would do it. He would look for Kvasnikoff, and Kvasnikoff is his roots, okay? His ancestral roots. And he would find it if he had to look in every corner of the earth. He would look, and in the process, he knew he would find himself. Approaching the cabin in the pitch blackness, he could hear Ace begin to growl. Ace he left in the cabin all day while he was out fishing. Ace, of course, would be somewhat perturbed with him for leaving him locked in the cabin all day. He stopped in front of the door and stood listening to the growls of his little puppy. He turned the doorknob. Ace began to bark. Ace, Arnie said. He threw open the door. Ace let out a yelp of recognition. And then here's the punchline, folks. Arnie heard the scratching of tiny claws on the wooden floor as man's friend ran to welcome him home. Ganachi.
Thank you, Bert. It's very comforting for me to learn the news that I have a child and a grandchild sitting here at the table to speak with us. We're going to, I'm going to be asking 2 more students to speak to develop our journey. And this next, and at the end, of course, we're going to ask Nora Dauenhauer to come back up and bring us from where she last left us to the present. And then we should have a few minutes for questions and answers if you would like to learn a little bit more from Nora or Bert. Liana Wallace has contributed to the Native community in many ways. Her educational career is at about midpoint, and it's an honor to have her in one of my classes. She contributes to campus efforts, community efforts, educational efforts, and has made sure that striving for excellence and giving back to the community is a family tradition. I'm grateful that Liana has agreed to participate in our session. Liana.
My name is Liana, and I'd like to first thank everybody who went before me. The hearing is arriving. They always send the babysitters first, and it's only after those babysitters arrive that the other little fingerlings come along. So I'm a fingerling, I hope, and that I enjoy being right behind the main babysitters that are leading the way. As a fisherman growing up here in southeastern Alaska, I grew up on a boat and was educated through correspondence study and, of course, through the special knowledge that my parents contributed. So I've always heard more than one viewpoint, which when it comes to my writing, that creates a big problem. I tend to fuse sentences, and I have a hard time because I like to repeat the last part. When you do oratory or you speak in public, you tend to make a point and then you repeat it again. It's just to make emphasis. And so learning to write, I'm learning to cut and cut and cut. And I suppose it didn't help much that when I was in the second grade, I had a teacher who really drilled the meaning of commas and semicolons. In fact, she was so angry with me that she stuck her fingernails into the back of my neck. And I remember also being hit with one of those sticks that they use for pointers. And so coming to class has always been very painful. But in Ernestine's class, along with other Native students, it's been really a wonderful, wonderful experience. And so what I've done is I've written the very first chapter to a book. I did it. It's called Wallace Highliner. Of course, it's fishing. This is going to be part of my memoirs, so it's the first chapter in that area. It starts off with Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is the fishing vessel Al Rita WB5301. Do you read me? Over. Please, someone respond. We're heading into the rocks. We're taking on water, and we've lost all steering. Please, someone respond. Don't bother trying to protect me. Remember, he said, I have my daughter on board. Don't forget her. She's 15. I guess I should read, huh? We had been fishing for cohos just outside of False Bay. It was the year that we had thunder and lightning, and when thunder hits, the fish always go deep. My dad knew this, and so we went to the trenches and we were fishing. The fish had hit us hard. In fact, our decks were just filled with salmon. And it wasn't too long before we heard the roaring of the wind coming down Chatham Strait. The clouds were starting to pile up by Stevens Passage. My dad looked and said, we better pull up the gear lines because we're going to get caught in this storm. With the winds already howling, and you know when the winds come down and they hit the water off the side and everything turns gray, you don't have much time. We turned and we looked, and we thought that the best course for us to go, because there are not very many harbors in Chatham Strait, we decided that the best course for us was to go across Cross Sound and go to a harbor called Thunder Bay. So we put everything that wasn't tied down, and we put everything away, including anything that could be washed overboard. As we still had our stabilizers out, we left them, and we decided to go ahead and run. We didn't want to take the time to pull them on board. With my father's finger firmly pressed on the acceleration button, not the usual press to increase the speed of a diesel engine, my father just pressed one solid button, and the engine speeded up immediately. My father started looking at the waves that were behind us. They were starting to pile up. He said, we might be too late, girl. We might be in for a rough ride. To get to Thunder Bay from False Bay, we had to travel across travel across sound at a 45-degree angle, which of course made the swells hit us quarterly. Our boat, which is a 42-foot boat with a 15-foot beam and a horseshoe stern, does not like quarterly swells. She tends to dip her stern down, scoop up water, and pivot in the center and twist off to the side. By the time we reached the middle of Cross Sound, the ocean swells from Cape Spencer were crashing against the ocean swells from Stevens Passage, and on top of those waves were the waves coming from the 65-mile-an-hour winds that were blowing down the straits. Cross Sound was smoking, and the waves were standing up. My job at the time was to stand at the back door. I was to watch for the monster swell, which I called the big one. Those came every so often. With every big one that approached, I would warn my dad, and then he would turn the boat to the left so that the stern came or was facing right directly towards the wave. He would push his button to accelerate the speed and push up ahead of the wave, riding with the wave pushing him down the channel. Then this is how we approached the middle of the sound, faster then slower, crisscrossing back and forth, and with me on the lookout from the back of the cabin while my father fought the wheel up front. Not much time had passed when the first monster swell had hit us. It crashed down across our stern, back deck, and splashed against the back of the cabin. Our boat shook, and when the stern dipped down and the bow pivoted, I held on to the door frame, legs braced against the doorway. The engine was screaming, and my dad was hanging on to the wheel. This was when I saw our skiff get lifted off the deck and getting jammed against the girdies on the back deck. I could see that we were going to lose it if we didn't pull it in time. So when my dad said, "Grab it, girl," I didn't argue. Being raised on a boat, you never argue with the captain. I just did what I was told. Even though the swells were still washing across the deck, I went towards the skiff. I hung on to the doorway and made it to the mast. And from there I crawled across the deck, holding on to the deck rail and hanging on to the scruffs. I slowly made it back to the back deck. I sometimes, when my hands were jerked away from the holding stations, I would get tossed across the deck and rolled back and forth until I was able to grab on again. This was how I made it across and where I was when another big swell came across the stern. I closed my eyes and I hung on with all my might, not knowing what was going to happen to the Alrita, except that when I opened my eyes, the skiff was gone. As the skiff is usually tied up to the pipe railing that extends from our from the main pole, it was still attached, but the skiff was upside down, being towed behind us. It was one of those newfangled skiffs, the ones that had the bulwarks nearest the bow pointed down. The pointed bow in an upside-down skiff, being towed along, tends to want to dive, and that's what the skiff was doing. The line holding the skiff was so taut that I could see that it was vibrating. I tried to pull it in. Against all odds, I was again doing what my dad was shouting at me to do. Pull it in, girl." And I was trying to, but the boat kept on diving. It was right about then that I noticed that the line was unraveling right before my eyes. I let go of it and just in time made it across the deck to the mast when I heard a snap. The line that was holding the skiff had broken free, and still the end that was still attached to the railings was whipping across the deck. I was lucky I didn't get wiped off the deck. I made it back to the cabin and reported back to my dad. We lost the skiff. The winds continued to increase, and the big waves were getting more frequent by the time we could see the mouth of Funter Bay. Dad said to hold on because he was going to make a sharp turn towards the harbor shortly, and that he was going to surf us in. This means that the Alrita would have a 20 to 30 foot trough on either side of her, and we would ride in between on the wave. At first I sat up by my dad and watched closely. I hate surfing. I especially don't like the idea of those large swells coming at us sideways. I got up. I couldn't watch, and I moved to the back door, as I didn't like the view that I had from where I was sitting. I heard my dad just then. He said, "Hang on, girl. We're going to turn at right after the next one." It was during that last big one when all of a sudden our boat shook with a ferocious shake and a loud snap. something had broken. I was ready to step out the door to see what had made the sound when all of a sudden a large pole came whipping across the deck, just missing me by inches. It rammed into the mast and whipped back out over the sea. The main pole that had broken, that was still attached to the top half, which was still attached to the mast, was whipping across the deck. Dad said, "Catch it, girl. Tie it down." Not thinking of the consequences and just following orders, I waited until the pole came snapping back across the deck and slapped itself against the mast, and it was there that I caught it and tied it down. Again, I heard my dad say something's wrong with the steering. I can't turn the boat. With all the fighting to secure the main pole, we had just passed the harbor of Thunder Bay. What was worse than that was that we couldn't steer away from the rocks and cliffs that were approaching us head on. I waited for the next set of directions, but instead of hearing that, I couldn't believe my ears when I heard my dad get on the radiophone and call Mayday. What was my dad doing? I thought. We never call Mayday. It can't be happening. I ran downstairs to check on the chain line that hooks our steering wheel to the rudder. There was nothing wrong with it. I ran outside and was getting ready to jump into the pit to see if anything was jammed against the back trolling wheel when I saw it. We were dragging something, and every time a swell hit our stern, I could see one half of the pole that wasn't jammed into our rudder come banging up against the stern rail. I shouted to my dad, "It's the main pole. It's jammed into the rudder." My dad came running out, but not until I heard him shouting on the radiophone, "Please look for my daughter." He came out, and together we looked at the pole jammed between the rudder and the bottom of our stern. "We'll have to pull it out. Here, I will tie a line around your waist, and I will lower you down after the wave picks up our stern. I want you to see what's holding that pole down by the rudder. Ready?" That's when my dad lowered me over the rail, and I looked. I could see the propeller spinning in midair. I also saw the bottom half of the main pole jammed between the rudder and the stern. My dad pulled me up as I was dangling off the back deck, and when the next swell came, he handed me a pickaroony. Pickaroony is a stick with a hook attached at the end, and it's used to move fish across the deck. He said, "When the stern lifts again, I want you to pry the pole loose." I was lowered down a few more times before I was actually able to pry it loose. It didn't print. I'll have to do the rest on my own, won't I? Okay, I can remember. It's my story. We pulled the pole loose, and as I was pulling it up, I tied it securely to the back of the deck. In the meantime, my dad ran inside the cabin, and he grabbed the wheel. He turned very sharply and was moving back out away from the rocks. And our bow pole, which was about 25 feet long off to the side, it looked like it was only a yard away from the cliffs. When a boat turns, the stern pivots the opposite direction. I was at the stern. I looked up, and I saw the barnacles. We were that close. Now, you recall I didn't like surfing. We were heading back into Thunder Bay. Surfing or no surfing, I just wanted to get into the harbor. And so when we approached that angle, we came up and we waited for a large swell. And the Alrita went on top of that swell. And it didn't matter that the troughs were on either side. We rode it and we went right into the harbor like a professional, like my dad always says, not looking like a greenhorn. It wasn't until the engines turned off and the quiet greeted us that I begun to shake. And my dad kept on drinking water, and he just couldn't quit drinking water. He said his mouth was swollen, and he felt like his tongue was just made out of cotton. He couldn't stop drinking. I went out on the back deck, and I remember very closely because what I saw next was the deck. My legs had given out, and I was laying, and the deck was right here against my face. That's when it dawned on me what we had been through. When we got back to the harbor, the Aurora Harbor, we looked pretty shorn. We were without a skiff, and we came in with one main pole broken, but we were greeted by a lot of fishermen who were probably very happy to see us, but I'm sure they just wanted to hear the story from the horse's mouth. Thank you.
Thank you, Liana. That was an exciting story. Liana is just a wonderful student, and that story made me think of so much. The beginning where the dad is calling on the radio, we're in trouble, the waves are coming at us, the wind is so strong, save my daughter. That reminds me of where we're at, right? That's where we are at as a culture, right? Said we're in trouble. We called to someone. We're in trouble. The winds are really, really strong. We might not make it, but save our children. And that's when people heard us. People like the people who are putting together this conference, people like the people at the university who are supporting Native education, all the people have banded together with us, and they're going to save us, and they're more important, they're saving our children. And you know, we can always remember, and we can tell the people in the future when we tell the story they want to hear. You know what? We were so close we could see the barnacles. We were so close, but we can do it too. That's what's happening to us too. We were so close we saw the barnacles, but we're coming back, and we're coming back strong. So that was the midpoint. We saw the beginning and the midpoint, and now we're looking at a student who is at the end of this cycle of his education, and we're going to listen to Nora tell us about reaching the pinnacle of her career. So when I was almost finished, when I went to UAS, I was almost finished with my 2-year degree program, and then I switched over to a bachelor's degree program. And when I completed that program, I went to Anchorage for my Master of Fine Art, and the thesis for that was turned into my book, Blonde Indian, and now I'm back at UAS as a teacher. This next student will graduate in May. I've had the privilege of having him as a student in more than one of my classes. He's bright, he's thoughtful, and he has a grand future. Please welcome Forrest Kvasnikoff.
Wow, Ernestine makes me sound a lot better than I actually am. I don't know where she got all those ideas from, but it's okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for the blessing and honor of being allowed to speak before you all today. I especially want to thank Ernestine for believing and trusting me in me enough, perhaps full-heartedly, to stand up here and tell my story, or at least part of it. Guna sheesh, and forgive me if I offend. That is not my intention. Before I start, I want to share a little anecdote I had over spring break. I've never actually met Nora or Richard Dauenhauer in person. I've been around, I've seen you guys around, but I haven't actually been introduced to you guys, which is unfortunate. But, however, I have been associated with them through their writings. I read an essay by Dick about Russian America and Russian missions. It's very good, very enlightening. I thank you for your writings and all your knowledge. And Nora as well. This past spring break, my girlfriend was reading from Life Woven with Song, your memoir. And it made us laugh so hard because it was the story about Raven and how he's hungry and thinking about going to McDonald's, maybe Dunkin' Donuts, because he really needs some food. It was so good, and I thank you too for all of your stories and your knowledge. So let me begin. I stand before you here today as a half-breed. And in the words of the 1953 Georgia State Representative David C. Jones and State Senator John D. Shepard, as reported in the New York Times March 1st of that year, half-breeds are not conducive to a higher type of society. Well, I beg to differ. In today's society, and perhaps almost every society's past and present, we all become half-breeds of some sort or another. I stand before you as a half-breed, as the grandson of a Norwegian and Aleut grandmother and a Russian grandfather, with a mother of such ancestry, and a biological father whose ancestry is of some unknown white predecessors, because I don't know him. My stepfather is an Aleutic Russian descent who speaks Sukhbiak fluently. In some ways, I am the ultimate half-breed. I am the son of alcoholic parents who, through tragedy and strength, quit drinking and became active and involved parents in my life and education, a transformation that I am constantly aware of and in awe of. Notwithstanding, I'm a college student who drinks beer and also maintains a nearly 4.0 GPA throughout my educational career. I stand here before you as, along with my several cousins, as being a graduate of the university, the first generation to do so. I'm an individual who went to a predominantly white and native schools and was accepted by each of my peers as equals. I grew up learning and singing and dancing Aleutic songs, while also growing up as an Orthodox Christian, being honored and blessed subdeacon under the recent Bishop Innocent. There's a favorite psalm of mine, it's Psalm 1. I remember younger I used to memorize passages of the Bible, and I thought, well, just start with one and then work through them all, and then memorize them. No problem, easy. But the beginning of the psalm is, Blessed are those who walk not in the counsel of the wicked, nor sit in the seat of scoffers, but their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on their law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yield its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. Isn't that a beautiful passage? It's poetry, words, very powerful. While today I neither sing or dance Aleutic songs or attend Orthodox services, I hold a deep respect and love for both the cultural and religious traditions that they represent. While I attended a predominantly native Alaskan high school, Mount Edgecombe High School, where Inupiaks, Yupiks, Athabascans, Haidas, Tsimshians, Aleuts, and Tlingits shared their culture through oral stories, song, dance, and food, it was there, ironically, that a white man, crazy white man, took a group of us high schoolers out in the woods to fast for 3 days and drink tea and find our souls. It was also the place where I took language classes in Chinese and where I fell in love with literature and all of its power. I grew up with parents who drank Coca-Cola. I like Pepsi. Don't tell my parents, though. Needless to say, identity in our modern society is a tricky business. Perhaps it always has been. My half-breed personal history, embodied not only in my blood, but also in my experiences, might be better described as multi-breed. But there is something more beyond my half-breed personal history and experiences that strikes a deep resonant chord within me, something that enrages and enlightens me, something that sparks my resolve and ambitions, something that compels and disheartens me, our collective histories. In a speech that Ernestine Hays gave some time back, she asked the people in the audience, what do we do with our histories? The histories she spoke of are our shared past of oppressions. Within the sphere of Alaska, beginning around 1742, with the Russian-directed exploration by Bering and Cherchagov, a slew of Russian fur traders, Promishkaliniki, having exhausted fur-bearing animals of Siberia and the further regions of Russia's northeast, sought after the profitable sea otter. In the process, while traveling west through the Aleutian Islands, on through Kodiak, past the Kenai Peninsula, then into southeast Alaska, many of these traders enslaved Alaska natives of every descent to do their hunting for them. You know, the stereotypical old joke that white men make bad hunters? Here's a sad historical example. Many families, especially of the Aleutians, went hungry without the extra contributions of men. Many men, women, and children alike were mistreated or beaten or patronized by Russian fur traders, Russian-American company workers and managers, and yes, even Orthodox clergymen. Even the famous and renowned Saint Innocent, or Father Veniaminov, an insightful and profound humanitarian for his time, looked fairly patronistic over natives and their traditions and cultures, employing now the cliche terms of savage and heathens upon them. Russians came with a presumption of superiority concerning their own culture, religion, and traditions. Their work, ultimately, was the work of an empire, colonization. That work was continued under the United States government and its citizens in 1867, where the Russian government signed a treaty that indicated that all the lands of Alaska, most of which not a single Russian had set foot on or mapped or charted or hunted upon or seen or smelt or touched with their hands, was not only their property, but presumed to have the sovereign right to sell a vast piece of land at a profit to themselves, without so much as a mere gesture of consultation with its original inhabitants. Imagine for a second, if a daily circulating newspaper existed way up north in 1867, the New Inupiaq Times, for instance, that proclaimed, 500 Russians sell Alaska to the U.S. at a penny an acre. Anyone would have been outraged, especially after they found out that it wasn't a joke. I pose Ernestine's question here again. What do we do with this history? Laugh? Weep? Shrug our shoulders, accept, move on? What do we do? But there's more. During the course of Russian occupation, it is believed that no more than 500 Russians were actually within Alaska at any one given time during its entire period of control. What the Russians lacked to cling on to Alaska were Russian citizens willing to take up habitation here. The U.S. government and its citizens made up for it. With their own cultural mythologies and assumptions concerning manifest destiny and white superiority, coupled with an insatiable need and demand for gold, whales, salmon, timber, security during World War II, and finally oil, wave after wave of enterprising and hopeful white settlers flooded the land. In their wake, native peoples were stripped of their land, their languages, their culture, their traditions, their dignity. White businessmen dealt unfairly with natives if they chose to deal with them at all. Politicians subscribed to racist policies and assumptions about native people. Missionaries, for enlightened and short-sighted purposes, educated the nativeness out of their pupils because of their conviction that they knew better, that they were saving the Indian, that they were right, that they were saving the souls in the name of all that was good in the world. Tell me, what do we do with this history? Even more pointedly, what do we do? What do I do with today and tomorrow, our contemporary society? I don't walk anywhere today and see signs snidely demanding no pets or natives allowed. But what do I say or do for the native man or woman of my own generation that are so consumed with past oppressions and wrongs they cannot reach beyond them? Cannot see anything but the raping of people and land, the slander and murder, the racism and cruelty. They are so enraged with fundamentally historically true feelings of subjugation that they substitute personal growth and hard work with wallowing and self-pity. They become the defeated, weak, and weeping victim of absolute evil and cruelty. What do you or I do in the face of this? What do I do with my stepfather's knuckles that were slapped for speaking his original tongue? What do I tell a black, a Latino, a white, a Mexican, a Chinese, a Japanese, or any other American when they ask me about my access to health care, to dividends, and other rights and privileges they don't enjoy? Do I turn towards my history, our history, and say, see, I've been more oppressed than you. My hardships are greater than yours. For I tell you here and now, every society's history, nearly every individual's story contains elements of hardship and endurance. Oppression is the language of history. Whether it be of the Jews driven from the Promised Land or slaughtered under Nazi Germany, or Palestinians relocated and subjugated by Israel, or Armenians murdered and quieted under the Ottoman Empire and the Turkish government alike, or the tribes of Europe, the Gauls conquered by the Romans, the Anglo-Saxons overthrown by the Normans in 1066, or that of Asia, the Chinese and Koreans suffering brutal occupation under the Japanese, Tibetans struggling under Chinese control, ancient peoples of the far north of Russia, the Komi, the Sami, the Nenets, the Enets, the Duligans, and many more, faced with the advancement of the Russian Empire, or the Aboriginals of Australia subjugated under British peoples, the African tribes and people who met with British, Dutch, French, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, German, and Belgian peoples' proclamations of control extending to their very enslavement, or the Marshallese people of the South Pacific who were relocated by the U.S. government so that nuclear warheads could be tested on their homelands and the effects of nuclear fallout on humans could be tested on Marshallese people. Oppression extends beyond the boundaries of inter-ethnic and cultural conflicts, but intra-societal as well. Humanity's societies have devised ways to subjugate among their own peoples. Fear of the other goes beyond simply one's skin, but also discrimination based on socioeconomic class, cultural capital, and status, as well as religious institutions, affiliations, and beliefs, have been the purveyors of war over the resources of the world round. And it is the poor who have largely bared the brunt of this burden. In today's society, first world countries wield their mighty capitalistic markets like a blade that drive rural people into urban areas of commerce to survive in this modern world, that cuts into third world people's countries to give them meager pay and mindless work, that dump mass amounts of pollutants into their water sources and air, that trample trees and disregard wildlife, leaving resources disseminated or weak to the point of extinction. This oppression takes root in age-old vices, greed, ignorance, and a willful irreverence for life. Does this story sound familiar? Does it enrage you as it does me? We must again turn to Ernestine's question. What do we do with these histories, these contemporary facts of our time? Through this collective history, delineating oppressions in my own personal half-breed history, we've missed something. And I've been trying to steer us to this point, but my thoughts and words are slow. Forgive me. By looking at history through the lens of collective oppressions, we oftentimes lose sight of the fact that history does not fit within the nice and neat binary oppositions of good and bad. We lose sight of the fact that Native Alaskans, since time immemorial, moved around, created technologies of their own, and changed with time, just as they had done during their contact with Russian and Spanish explorers and white settlers from the United States. We lose sight of the fact that Native Alaskans, indeed all indigenous peoples the world round, have been agents and purveyors of their own history, their culture and traditions. The evidence for this agency can be found in your faces, in the beautiful artwork I see all around town, in Nora's stories and her humor. By approaching history through oppressions, we lose sight of the fact that the oppressors and the oppressed alike suffer in turn. I lose sight of the fact that Mount Edgecombe High School, the boarding school I attended, once a place of forced assimilation into Western society during most of the 20th century, now operates to preserve cultural knowledge and traditions. We lose sight of the tried and true strength of communities and individuals to adapt and persevere and succeed in the face of hardships and heartaches. The evidence is in this room. We must not lose sight. Turning in reflection upon my personal history, our collective history, and the complex layered history the world has in all of its immensity and beauty, I come to several conclusions. My blood and experiences do not make me a half or even multi-breed. Indeed, they don't even make me human. I am not Aleut. I am not Russian. I am not Norwegian. I am alive. I am my mother's son. We have been, born into a community of life with all its messy inconsistencies and troubled and humorous stories. With this birth, we undertake the responsibilities inherent in the community of life, care and respect for our ancestors, families and friends, our home communities, the plants and animals that surround us who sustain and teach us. But this responsibility extends throughout the great chain of existence. It binds us in a contract of mutual care and respect. By turning to our experiences, to holistic views of history, we might garner the moral energy and fortitude to address and change the problems and issues of our communities. We might better grapple with life's ferocious capacity for change, and in so doing, make positive steps for our own personal growth, for the betterment of our communities, and, if we play our cards right, the sustainability of this planet and all its light that gives us so many gifts. In closing, I want to turn to two statements, one by Ernestine and another by a Pequot Native American, William Apis, who wrote An Indian's Looking Glass for the White Man in the year 1833. I turn to these two because their words taste like fruit, and it makes me tingly. I turn to these words because I think they ardently proclaim the thoughts and ideas I am merely trying to echo here. When Ernestine posed her difficult rhetorical question, what do we do with our histories? She had this powerful thought on the matter, that if we truly learn about one another, if we are silent for an extra moment when we think before we speak, if we remember that dominant is not a synonym for superior, then perhaps we can take some time to evaluate not the shortcomings of others, but the limitations of our own ways of seeing. In a similar vein, Apis, again writing in 1833, that's 176 years ago, commented on the legacies of oppressions between white settlers and Native Americans. And perhaps one of the most moving passages I've ever read, he says, he says, "It was indeed nothing more than the spirit of avarice and usurpation of power that has brought people in all ages to hate and devour each other." But, he goes on to say, "You and I have to rejoice that we have not to answer for our fathers' crimes. Neither shall we do right to charge them onto one another. We can only regret it and flee from it. And from henceforth, let peace and righteousness be written upon our hearts and hands forever." Don't those words taste good? Aren't they powerful? I hope you think so. I feel they give me power and strength to work towards a better life and world. Perhaps they can do the same for you. Gunashchish.
So now we have a few minutes to hear from Nora, but before Nora steps back up, I want to remind us about just a few of her accomplishments. Nora has degrees in anthropology, was the 1978 to 81 Humanist of the Year, was named Woman of Distinction in 2006, received an Alaska Governor's Award for the Arts, received an honorary Doctor of Arts degree in 2001, won a 2005 Community Spirit Award from First Peoples Fund, was the recipient of a Hale Award, received an American Book Award, and is internationally recognized for her poetry, fieldwork, translation, and explication of Tlingit oral literature. Her work has been widely anthologized. She has devoted her life to creative expression and to the preservation of Tlingit language and culture. Her works include the landmark Beginning Tlingit, her 1983 poem Egg Boat, her 1988 book of poetry The Droning Shaman, and her award-winning Life Woven with Song. She co-edited the Sealaska Heritage Foundation's highly regarded Classics of Tlingit Oral Literature series with Richard Dauenhauer. Other books she edited with Richard Dauenhauer include Because We Cherish You, See Alaska Elders Speak to the Future, and of course their most recent work, Russians in Tlingit America. She is a favorite and sought-after personality for conferences and readings. She is an authority on vital Native issues such as repatriation, healing, education, language preservation, place name preservation, language immersion, workshops, film, poetry, and oratory. She is accustomed to giving keynote speeches and writing plays. She is a sought-after consultant for many efforts critical to keeping our culture strong. We've seen speakers and students at different points in their education and career, and now it's time to listen to this part of Nora's story. I'm sure it's going to be even more interesting because when we left her, she had just gotten a letter from a professor named Richard Dauenhauer. Nora Dauenhauer.
Oh my. Thank you, Forrest. And the rest of you, thank you. And Gunalchish Sangalacht. I want to go back and start all over again with 1970. While in Juneau, I worked on my father's oratory from his potlatch, memorial potlatch for his brother, my Uncle Jim. So when I got to AMU, I was carrying my work. I wasn't having much luck with it because I kept making mistakes. I have to think in two languages, Tlingit and English. It was hard. But then I showed it to my advisor, who was Richard Dauenhauer, and he liked it. He liked my work. So I kept on struggling. But I started to work on the oratory as a project, and he was my advisor. And then I took a course from an anthropologist who was offering a course, an anthropological approach to religion. And with the insistence of my husband, I went and took that course. And I kept on playing the same game. We went to bars in Anchorage, and like I did in Juneau, when I spent all my money for booze in the evening after I got paid. I gave the money to people who didn't even like me. And on St. Patrick's Day, I signed my name O Florendo so I could fit in. Anyway, I had friends that I did this with. And after being in Anchorage, I started school and continued to work on my Tlingit material. Fortunately, I took a course in poetry, which helped me quite a bit in writing about and translating Tlingit potlatch speeches. That wasn't all of it, though, but I ended up finally with a draft of the oratory, which became a memorial oratory from memorial speeches at Jim Marks Memorial. I can't remember the exact word right now. So that's how I got to the publishing the book on the potlatch speeches. It was difficult. It's still difficult to talk about it because it's not easy to do this for people who don't understand what it's all about. It has a lot to do with death and the mourning for the dead and trying to face death and make it easier for ourselves. So that's what I was working on. It was hard. I still think that I could have done a lot more, but I haven't done that yet. So, in doing this, speeches to heal our spirits helped me quite a bit. That I think it saved my life. Jesse Dalton's speech, David Kadashan's speech, Austin Hammond, Charlie Joseph, George Davis, all of these guys were just like they're watching me. I was afraid of them when I collected from them and started to talk to them in Tlingit that what I wanted to do was to write. Is that all you can? You know, it's hard. It's difficult. But I felt that I could do it because I could speak Tlingit and I could speak English. But I didn't have the material in education to really do a good job. And I wanted to do a good job. So, anyway, by working on these speeches saved my life. I don't drink anymore. I drink fake beer once in a while. And that's how my life ended up on writing all these books Dick and I have been working on. He says sometimes it brings our marriage to divorce because we argue about what that line means, one little line. Sure, it means that. He says, no, it doesn't. Of course it does. Anyway, we go on that way, and we finally agree that this is going to be okay. So we're on our, I can't remember how many books we did now, but we're going to do Raven for the next project. And I am hoping that the books will be good medicine like we have been using it for. For me especially, it was a good medicine. And today we're just doing proofreading of Raven. Charlie Joseph's daughter, who's over there, Ethel Makinen, she's helping proofread this Raven stories we got so many of. And hopefully we'll get it done before 20 years is over. I thank you very much, and I am happy to be with you who are the panelists. And thank you.
We're a little over time, but I'd like to ask all of you to join me in once again thanking Nora for her wonderful, precious words. Gonna cheese.